The ability to perform missions which a weapons systems designers could not imagine at the time the system was in its infancy is a measure of its greatness. By this standard, the Tupolev Tu-22M heavy bomber justly deserves the label of one of the classic weapons of the 20th century, and now also of the 21st. The initial mission was simple enough, carrying on the tradition of World War II era long-range medium bombers like the IL-4 and the post-war jet-powered Tu-16 and Tu-22. The variable geometry supersonic Tu-22M was, like its predecessors, to serve the dual roles of a sub-strategic bomber attacking key targets in the enemy's operational depth, and as an anti-ship missile carrier for naval aviation. Its main weapon was the Kh-22 Bordia Storm missile, which, while often described as a cruise missile, is really more of an aeroballistic weapon due to its ability to climb to the altitude of 25 to 30 kilometers before diving on its target at speeds in excess of Mach 4, rendering most defensive systems incapable of stopping its conventional or nuclear payload. The Tu-22M could carry between 1 and 3 of these missiles, though the heavier loads naturally reduced its radius of action. The bomber's capabilities were impressive enough, and caused sufficient concern within NATO for US negotiators to strenuously, though unsuccessfully, insist this comparatively small twin-engined machine, not in the same class as the B-52, B-1 or Tu-160, be classified as a strategic bomber. The Tu-22M was not used for its original purpose during the Cold War, though it did see action over Afghanistan against Western-backed Mujahideen. The end of the Cold War and the prolonged crisis of the Russian armed forces meant near obscurity for these bombers, as it was not clear what missions they would now perform. The West instigated civil war in Syria, which prompted a Russian intervention, brought the 63-strong Tu-22M force back into the spotlight, this time as a key aerial weapon in the campaign against the Islamic State. While the raids against ISIS targets were performed with Tu-95MS and Tu-160 participation to demonstrate the conventional cruise missile capability of these platforms, most of the long-range aviation missions against ISIS were flown by Tu-22Ms, which also dropped most of the ordnance. The sub-strategic character of the bomber meant it could be used where the four-engined heavies would be overkill, and where tactical bombers couldn't reach due to their limited range. Tu-22M sorties were essential in securing Palmyra and breaking up threats to both Palmyra and Deir Zor by attacking ISIS troop concentrations and logistics, to the point that a full-scale assault against either couldn't materialize. Tu-22Ms also struck ISIS oil infrastructure, which was left unmolested during the alleged US bombing campaign. The effect was to allow Palmyra and Deir Zor to become economy of force missions, with Syrian Arab army forces redeployed towards more important strategic targets, such as Aleppo. The recent successes around Aleppo were in large measure due to the Tu-22M's effectiveness at blunting ISIS threats. The Syria campaign is unlikely to be the Tu-22M's last hurrah. NATO's belligerent policies towards Russia mean that the bomber's importance to Russia's national security has increased, and its capabilities make it a platform of choice in a number of theatres of operations, where long-range supersonic speed and high payload are at a premium, including the Black Sea and the Arctic. The Tu-22M is viewed as a key component of the counter-ABM strategy, aimed at countering US anti-ballistic missile deployments in Romania, Poland, and elsewhere around Russia's periphery. The strategy is intended to deprive NATO leadership of confidence in its ABM systems by holding them at risk using a variety of delivery vehicles with differing flight profiles in order to make defense impossible. This means the ability to strike at ABM sites using both short-range ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. In the case of Poland, this is accomplished using Iskander-M ballistic missiles and Kalibr cruise missiles. Since Romania's ABM deployment is further from Russian territory, the ballistic component will likely be provided by Crimea forward-based Tu-22M bombers armed with the new Kh-32 aero-ballistic missiles that are being developed as Kh-22 replacements, with much greater range, speed and flight ceiling, as well as pinpoint precision allowing conventional strikes against small fortified targets. The usefulness of the Tu-22M is such that the future PAC-DA heavy bomber, whose design has not yet been finalized, may be conceived as a replacement for the Tu-22M rather than the newer Tu-160, which in any event is returning to serial production. If so, this unique Russian line of sub-strategic bombers will receive a worthy successor. One of the stars of the Russian Airspace Force's air campaign in support of Syrian government forces has been the Su-30SM twin-seat multi-role heavy fighter, which, although designed primarily for the air combat role, proved equally effective in the fighter-bomber role. The Su-30 design dates back to the late 1980s, with the first flight being made in 1989. The original intent was to take advantage of the Su-27's tremendous range and payload potential that was limited by the exhaustion a single crew member experienced during lengthy missions, which, thanks to aerial refueling, could last into several hours. Adding a second crew member would reduce the pilot's workload considerably and, moreover, enable the crew to handle a wider array of weapons and sensors. The addition of the NO-11 bar's active phased array radar, capable of detecting and tracking aerial, ground and naval targets, also meant that the twin-seat Su-30 could perform some of the missions usually handled by aerial early warning aircraft, namely control of the airspace and the direction of friendly aircraft to their targets. The collapse of the USSR meant that the Su-30's entry into service would be greatly delayed, as the technologies necessary to fully utilize its potential would not be available until the early 2000s. Moreover, the reduction in the number of combat aircraft meant that each plane would now have to carry out multiple functions. It meant that the days of specialized fighters, attack aircraft and bombers were coming to an end, as evidenced by the fact that all the late-model MiG and Su aircraft have multi-role capabilities. The Su-30 was not an exception. The Su-30M2, which began entering Russian fighter regiments in 2010, and the Su-30SM, which followed 2 years later, can use a wide range of unguided and guided air-to-ground weapons, including medium-range air-to-surface missiles like the Kh-29 and Kh-59, and satellite-guided bombs, in addition to the full array of advanced air-to-air weapons, including the RVV-SD active radar homing missile, which is often seen carried by Su-30SMs and Su-35s over Syria, as insurance against NATO fighters' interference. The Su-30 also proved to be a remarkable export success. It turned out that many countries around the world, including India, China, Malaysia, Venezuela, Indonesia, Uganda, Vietnam, Kazakhstan and Algeria, also had a need for a powerful long-range fighter aircraft capable of handling a wide range of missions, and could not afford to procure equivalent Western aircraft, such as the F-15. Since many of these countries participate in joint exercises with Western air forces, these exports made it possible to evaluate the Su-30 against its contemporaries. It is a testimony to the basic Sukhoi design that the addition of the second crew member and the expansion of its capabilities did not affect its original air-to-air mission, for the Su-30 has excelled whenever pitted against Western aircraft, such as the F-15, F-16, FA-18 and the Eurofighter Typhoon. There are no indications that the Su-30 has ever faced the fifth-generation F-22 in such matchups, but even though the US fighter is on paper more modern than the Sukhoi design, the outcome of such a matchup would be a far from foregone conclusion. It is entirely possible that the Su-30 could defeat the F-22, whose flaws and limitations have been carefully kept out of the public view, thanks to a combination of passive infrared detection devices that are particularly effective against fast-flying high-altitude targets, which tend to present a strong infrared signature against the background of cold sky, and a comprehensive electronic countermeasures suite comparable to that mounted on the Su-34 bomber. With a total of 116 Su-30 aircraft currently in service or on order for the Russian Aerospace Forces and naval aviation, and several hundred more aircraft in use around the world, it is clear that the Su-30 will remain a major workhorse for decades to come, even though it may be overshadowed in Russian service by the Su-35 and the T-50. The basic design still retains considerable modernization potential. India, which is the largest Su-30 user with over 200 aircraft, is in negotiations with Sukhoi concerning a multi-billion-dollar modernization project for its Su-30 MKI fleet that would include making the aircraft stealthier and equipped with an internal weapons bay. Russian service Su-30s are likely to receive upgrades incorporating Su-35 and even T-50 technologies and systems.